Now, chances are that if you're a fan of a particular game franchise and you enjoy a lot of what the developers provide, you'll likely be also into trying out a new IP being made by those same developers. And we've seen lots of cases, like Chrono Trigger being made by the minds that gave you both Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest, as well as Metaphor ReFantazio being made by the same people who did Persona 3, 4, and 5. And obviously, the topic for this video being Scarlet Nexus, an original IP from Bandai Namco lifted from the staff that worked on things such as Code Vein, God Eater, and the one that caught many interest, including myself, the Tales series. Now this game serves as a brand new exciting action RPG, setting into a very cool futuristic setting, as well as having the ability to use powers to move things with your mind as part of the core gameplay, among also having various things like different powers, cool RPG elements, dual protagonists, and also, as mentioned, being done by people who worked on Namco's other flagships. It honestly sounded like a cool recipe. I'll never forget the time it was announced at an Xbox show in 2020, and it just looked so really cool. Even if other people's reactions, when they saw it, looked like Namco was going to do another anime clone of, say, another existing property, much how God Eater and Code Vein were. But to hear that people worked on the Tales series, like Kenji Anabuki himself being director of this game, and who was also involved with some of the best and most underrated titles of the Tales series, got many, as well as myself, hooked to the game itself, with the promotion of this game going all out. Everything more about the game itself, to even having an anime adaptation and a cool demo. Fast forward to 2021, where it was released to a solid positive reception, with getting a high 70 to 80 on Metacritic, and it's selling 1 million units almost a year after its initial release. However, after that, the game just simply vanished from the cultural zeitgeist, even despite the fact that the game itself got, as mentioned, an anime, as well as post-launch support. But even after that, it seemed to have left people's minds. Hey, where'd you all go? Hey everyone, what up? Mad Kaiser here. Welcome as we dive back into Scarlet Nexus 4 years later. The development history. Scarlet Nexus started development around April 2015, with Kenji Anabuki serving as game director and Kaito Iizuka, out of God Eater fame, serving as its producer. Being comprised around another team within the Tales division, with approximately 35 devs from Tales joining on that project, while the remainder of the said Tales division would work on the latest Tales game, that being Arise. This game was actually in pre-production for 6 years, starting out as an internal research project, and an extra 2 years before finishing the build, with the outline of the game was finalized fairly early on. One of Anabuki's goals was to make a game using the very popular motif of a group with special powers, and got artist Kota Ochai and scenario director Inoki to join the team to help flesh out the art and story aspects of the game, and create its setting, alongside famed Tales writer at the time, Taiyuki Mijimiya, I apologize for butchering, to help draft the story. Fellow outsourced studio, Tosei Co. Limited, joined in the project, providing the second build through production. And afterwards, they kept on working on the game, using Epic Games' Unreal Engine 4, that was also used in various Bandai Namco products, even also used for the current Tales entry, that being Tales of Arise. The theme of the game is centered on being a brain punk RPG, with the meaning of Scarlet Nexus, which itself refers to Red Connection or Red Bond. Therefore, objects or persons connected with red lines represent a big part in the visuals and key art of the game. The game itself took inspiration from prior Tales games, most notably being the dual story approach that Tales of Xillia had, and proving to do much more on how that game implemented it. The game itself also had some various cut content, a most notable one being having cryokinesis, being used as a power of ice, with the intent of using it to skate on ice. However, that proved to be difficult to implement, so it was cut and relegated for a side character to use it instead. After a bit of an impact during COVID-19 in 2020, the team was able to still press on and have various previews around events like Gamescom, Tokyo Game Show, and even had producer of Tales of Arise, Tomizawa, play a preview of this game in collaboration with Anabuki, seeing the gameplay footage of Tales of Arise back in April 2021. Scarlet Nexus would release on June 25th, 2021 as stated for PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, and Xbox Series, and Xbox One, and PC. The story of Scarlet Nexus. In this game, we live in an alternate futuristic reality where humanity has made a breakthrough and developed technology and formed a society based on substances found in human brains that grant them superpowers. And those people get enlisted or recruited to join the Other Suppression Force, OSF for short, a powerful military organization of superpowered warriors combating the others, dangerous and mindless mutations that come from the sky with their wanting to devour brains, born from the Extinction Belt, a dangerous fog-like substance that envelops the world. In this story, you follow dual protagonists, Yuto Sumeragi and Kasane Randall, with Yuto Sumeragi hailing from the powerful Sumeragi family, who volunteered to join the OSF after being saved by Mysterious One as a kid, and then Kasane Randall, a girl that hails from the Randall family, who was brought in by the OSF and seen abilities as well as being top of her class in the academy. Both of them wield psychokinesis, which is actually gravikinesis, as they train and become OSF members and partake in missions with various other cadets, as well as eliminating the others. However, things go haywire as during a mission in the abandoned subway where Naomi Randall, Kasane's sister, gets mysteriously shot by the government and transforms into another, much to the shock and horror of both her friends and cadets, and afterwards, when Nagi Carmen, Yuto's best friend and shocked by the event, comes back from the hospital but his mind and personality has been altered, and things go worse from there when the OSF split off and fight against each other amongst themselves for the various nations of New Himuka and Seiron with their own twisted motives and ideals. Among after the death of Saito Naokami, triggering an emotional reaction from Kasane and Yuto, which opened a powerful black hole called the Kunai Gate that gradually opens and will consume the world. Among all that, both parties from Yuto and Kasane diverge and often clash and have their own struggles, where it's things like Yuto realizing he's a dud, a being that isn't born or capable with powers, and only got it thanks to Kasane, or Kasane being burdened by having to kill Yuto in the past, due to meeting him in the future, a future that's completely desolate and devoid of life, and being begged to kill them in the present, so that this threat can never happen again. Among that, both sides will learn more about the world, the shocking nature between the three major powers, and their ideals, and how ultimately they will have to change this world. The story starts itself straightforward, but once you get to phase 2, regardless of who you pick, you'll get to a shocking elevation with the aforementioned Naomi twist, and this game does not let up with more shocking twists, and in a way, it reflects aspects of the real world, and delves into interesting topics like corruption from the governments, experimentation, manipulation from the media, and even delves into a low-key class system, with duds being separate from people with psionic abilities, as well as the ability to stop aging. It's a lot to take in, mixed in with the motives of the characters and antagonists, with both the twists and turns, that overall makes for a very complex, albeit sometimes narrative that can be all over the place, especially when you come across later phases of the story. However, one thing that helps this story is on how a bulk of the characters' routes are separate and have their own unique showings, so it doesn't feel like you're entirely playing the same game twice and seeing all the same story beats all over again. As the first two missions and the halfway point, both Yuito and Kasane's stories diverge drastically, with them overlapping at the endgame. It's very clear when making this, especially when you look at Tales of Xilia's Dual Protagonists campaign, which this game takes inspiration from. The stories really didn't diverge drastically, outside of a couple of moments, with arguably Jude's one being the best written, while Miller's was less than that. However, in this one, both Yuito and Kasane's routes have their own weight, and just only playing one route won't provide strong context as the stuff provided in exposition mentioned in the other route. So really, playing both sides will give you the full picture and provide a much stronger impact. The main characters. Speaking of dual protagonists, this is where we talk about them. Now regarding the cast, I think the game does itself a good job of having them be enjoyable characters in their own way, with having their very obvious strengths and weaknesses, but still being relatable in a sense. Yuito Sumeragi I think is a really cool character. Now I heard some people say that he either feels like a generic or bland shonen protagonist. However, I'm in a disagreement here, as he's both likable with being nice to his peers, but also burdened with the fact that not only does he want to help people, but to also thank the one that saved him all these years ago, and also wants to live up to his family's expectations, most notably being his father Joe Sumeragi, who's the chairman of Nihumuka, as well as his older brother Kaiju Sumeragi, who's actually the head of the National Defense Force. He's challenged and even put at tough positions, especially when he gains temporary or full status as a leader, especially during tough situations. However, his world is completely flipped upside down when not only sees how corrupt the world is, especially within the government, but also things like the shock of Naomi turning into an other, or even worse, his best friend Nagi Kamen being mind controlled, and even much more worse when he's being threatened by Kasane. Not only that, but he also suffers various symptoms of memory degradation every time he uses his powers, as well as also his father does get killed later on. Yuito's life is rough to say the very least, but with the support of his friends, his tenacity and optimism, and willing to help uncover the truth and help to change the world, makes for an overall amazing protagonist. Shout out to Chris Hackney of Fire Emblem Three Houses Dimitri fame, who provides a very good performance between both his base self as well as his depressed future self, and overall makes Yuito a very solid protagonist. Then we move on to Kasane Randall, who is another character I enjoyed equally. Now her demeanor is much more cold and either sassy as well as calculating, that may come across as unlikable to some. But that's really because we see her attitude, where she acts so tough and protective of her sister. As we learn, she was adopted by the Randalls after losing her supposed real mother, and they weren't essentially loving parents, with Naomi Randall, her sister, being the one that stands up for her. In a way, she actually reminds me of Lightning Farron from the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy, this rather callous and aggressive individual who's tough and all, but deep down she's broken, and she had to act tough when both she and her sister Sarah lost their parents, and she had to toughen up just to protect Sarah. And this is really challenged when, as mentioned before during the subway incident, when Naomi, her own world above her, gets turned into another, and she's even willing to prevent her own teammates from attacking Naomi, even when the Seiran forces hold her in captivity, and try to learn on how to reverse this process. But among this cold exterior she also has feelings for Seto Narakami, after being nice for her and even saving her at one point. But as mentioned with Yuito, her world keeps coming crashing down even further when he ultimately gets killed, and thus is put into a mental breakdown that creates the whole Kunad Gate to begin with, among also meeting in a very dystopic future where everything is gone, with an older Yuito being the last survivor, who's depressed and begs Kasane to kill him in the past to prevent this calamity from even going further. Coupled with the eventual loss of Naomi, who means everything to her, and learning that she's also from Togetsu as a byproduct, and burden on having to kill Yuito out of obligation, Kasane herself really has it rough, but develops to become more friendly and caring to her peers, even Yuito, a recommenders who is very talented across many lots of anime and games, really gives an emotional performance.
Naomi, you can't leave me. No. Naomi, why?
Side note, I also really do love the fact that this doesn't lead to a typical romance between the two, given that the fact that they are sort of related to having the same mother. And not everything has to lead to a romance, and this is someone who really likes a good romance story. Both of them have their own compelling sides, and overall are very enjoyable protagonists. The party members. The other OSF members through both campaigns are also enjoyable in their own right. Hanabi Ichijo, who wields pyrokinesis, is cute, but also caring and supportive of Yuito since they were kids, and even clearly has a crush. Even though Yuito himself can't take a goddamn hint, like bad dude, she's clearly loves you. She has ties to the Ichijo family that's also involved with the OSF hospital, and her aunt being the one that was also an other like Naomi, and clearly, no matter what, she wants to help Yuito. Shiden Ritter, who wields electrokinesis, is a character that really puts you off because of how abrasive and downright arrogant he is, clearly having a more inferiority complex. And it's mostly because he aspires to be great as his idol Seto, and anytime he fails, he either blames himself or anyone else, especially in Yuito's side, where he also calls Baki Pakin, which, not gonna lie, is completely uncalled for, but indeed the worst character ever. Tsugumi Nazar, one who obtains clairvoyance, and is the more analytical person who can learn the situation and detect any obstacles. She's often shy to people due to initially being shunned because of abilities, with her only friends being plants, as they don't feel or talk back to her. But she's willing to be valuable in the mission and to make friends. Kaguro Dawn, who possesses invisibility, sort of acts like a jovial, suave, and full of charm dad-like figure to Tsugumi. But deep down, he has a secret, where he's actually one of the earlier immigrants 2,000 years ago in Cold Sleep, who came across the moon, hailing from Togetsu. As well, he's the one responsible for killing Yuito's father, and despite the sins he's committed, he's willing to help, even if it means protecting his family above, even if they are gone 2,000 years ago. Gemma Garrison, who wields scaleokinesis, is 50 years old, and he plays things serious and takes things right seriously down to the book. However, after the shocking truth between the government, it changes his outlook on life, as with Yuito and others see much joy in life in living, especially when the current world has much to offer. Kyoka Eden, who can be able to duplicate herself, is as skilled as Gemma, and is a high-ranking officer, though acts like the team's surrogate mother. Though like Kaguro, she actually has a secret, where she hails from Togetsu, as actually a clone of Dr. Hyoto Pope, founder of the Togetsu faith, and the creator of the Design Children, which comprises of clones of her, Kasane, as well as Wakana Sumeragi. But even with that purpose, she's willing to help her real family. Luca Travers, who wields teleportation, is what is called a Septentrion, which is a high-ranking OSF member, and also brother to the strongest OSF member out there, being Karen Travers, who's like Tsugumi, also analytical, and provides the best course of option and action to take. But he has a burden of trying to stand up next to his brother, as well as also being concerned by his recent actions. And lastly, for my money's worth, we have the best character, Arashi Spring, who wields hypervelocity. But with Arashi, she's more of a laid-back person, as well as a pop star figure with her lazy aura persona. But she's able to be quick to think on par with the other OSF members. All of these characters hold value as much as the main two, with some of them having moments to shine, and you get to learn more about them, both during the story and especially the Bond episodes. The ones that get left out would have to be the Fraser twins, that being both Wataru and Haruka, where aside from them being ones to handle the communications and be able to use telepathy, and also doing their best Rise Kujikawa impression during battle.
You burned it good. It looks hot.
Hey, the enemy's weak to fire. That's hot.
There's not much interaction with them. Hell, even side characters like Fubuki Spring, as well as Nagi and Naomi, got a lot of interactions than these two. Hell, they don't even have Bond episodes. Until of course the DLC did fix that, to an extent. But aside from that, each of the characters are really performed well, with highlights like Megan Taylor Harvey as Nabi, as was Chris Patton as Kaguro, Lauren Landa as Kyoka, Zhang Se-Hu as Tsugumi, and Reba Burr as Arashi. The Antagonists. Scarlet Nexus has a handful of antagonists, some of which are either minor or a few major here, outside of the whole others which are basically the driving force. Now, majority of the villains are either OSF members or members within the government with their own corrupt ideals and methods to do things, mostly interesting to their own benefit. As we see both warring factions, that being New Himuka's Suo as well as New Himuka's Seiran, causing some shady things that really put our main characters in turmoil. On one side we have Suo, and current leader of Suo as well as the NDF, that being Kaija Sumeragi, who's Yuto's brother, as well as head of OSF headquarters, who's actually even involved with the whole brainwashing of Nagi Carmen, who aforementioned was Yuto's best friend. He's depicted as often cold and stern, as well as a devoted follower of his ancestor and his entire will. However, due to the so-called will of his ancestor's vengeance towards the people on the moon, don't worry, we'll get back to that, he's both ruthless and cold, and he would not even hesitate of taking 1,000 people's brains. He even deemed Nagi, Yuto's best friend, as a failure. However, among that very rough and callous exterior, he does show pity towards Yuto, and his conviction of uncovering the truth at the end makes him warm itself over to be a better person. Now on the other side we have Seiran, that's involved in other shady business things like processing brains into ampules that help with managing powers during brain stress, and both sides of the government go through much shady actions and deals as well as experiments that are used to either combat the others efficiently or even use the OSF as their own lapdogs. I guess that doesn't sound entirely too outlandish, especially in the real world, given, well, recent events with various governments across all nations haven't exactly been buddy-buddy with each other. And move on to our other faction of villains, that being Togetsu and the Togetsu faith itself, which are comprised of members of the Zion Children, which serve the faith, and was also responsible of creating the Red Strings, a powerful source that's been present in both Yuto and Gisane, with the ability to time travel. But the whole main goal is to reshape the world, and even at one point, planning to erase history as one of their own schemes. As well, they serve as preservers for people to arrive safely from cold sleep after their descent from the moon. So yeah, there's also people on the moon. Among that the others came from an asteroid with particles that affected nearby animals and humans that resulted into their overall creation. And using advanced technology, they used it to send it down Earth, which began the whole extinction belt. So yeah, that part does get complicated, and it's one of the main grievances people have with the story, with lore dumps and given on how much the story throws at you. But despite on how convoluted it all is, and trust me it is, it does add a bit of a layer into the mix, and it explains things, like the situation of how Naomi turned into another. Oh, there are also other Mayan villains, like the Malone twins here, being both Yuta and Kodama, who are also other Septuptions, and the latter serving as once Shiden's superior in passing, though they really serve as Suo's lapdogs, and both of them are completely manipulative and just downright insane, even wanting to kill Kasane for treason. Not gonna lie, they're probably my least favorite characters in the whole game. The main villain, a look into Karan Travers. And then that brings us to Karan Travers, who is the leader of the Seiran Rebellion against New Himuka. And just like Fubuki, Seto, and his younger brother Luca, he's also a Septetrion, arguably the strongest OSF member out there, being dubbed as the Brain Eater, and he has the ability to copy everyone's powers, and serves as basically the main antagonist of the entire game. His more important goal comes into wanting to use the red strings that Kasane and Yuto both have, with their gravikinesis powers, on trying to go back in time to prevent Alice from turning into an other all these years ago. And while he may act all cold, stern, and rather intimidating, deep down he's broken and he has feelings for Alice, to the point that he's willing to save her at the cost of him being erased at history. And while the game vaguely hints at this, it was only up to the final DLC that further emphasizes this context. And even an episode of the anime gives more detail of his backstory, as well as Alice and Fubuki. He's a rather tragic villain, and in a way, he reminds me of Kai's Ballad from Final Fantasy XIII too. Two powerful beings cursed of watching their beloveds die over and over, and willing to change history, as well as having a very terrifying presence. Performed beautifully by Armin Taylor, he serves as a foil to Kasane with Karan, as well as Kasane herself also having close relationships with people important to them, and was determined to save them no matter what, as well as both Alice and Naomi respectively were turned to others. And he can also serve as a foil to Yuito, as both of them were born as duds, and they were subjected to experiments that gave them their powers. Both Yuito and even Karan were even at odds with their own brothers, that being Luca and Kaito respectively. And oddly enough, Yuito's future self took a similar path as Karan, trying to mend things alone without his help from his friends and comrades, which only led to the result of the imminent destruction of the world, and concluded that it would be better if he would presumably be killed, much unlike how Karan erased himself from existence to try to create a new world with Alice in it. In retrospect, Yuto would have been like Karan if he took the burden of fixing things by himself without the help of his own friends. He overall makes a good villain, and in a way, I think he was inspired by the likes of Julius Will Kresnik from Tales of Xillia 2, which was another game that not only Anabuki was inspired by, but also directed himself. The visuals. Scarlet Nexus has a great art style of making cel-shaded anime characters with some very interesting environments, with using Unreal Engine 4 that to this day still ages well, especially 4 after its year of release. All of the characters here are really designed and pop off well, with mixing anime-like designs with a more cool, futuristic, modern sense. Even the others themselves have these great, albeit grotesque and ugly designs in the best way possible. The environments are downright stunning, with highlights like Seiran City with its bright sunset, as well as Hieno Mountain with these beautiful northern lights, just being absolutely breathtaking. There's a decent amount of cool action and emotional cutscenes rendered beautifully with 60 FPS, and even the anime opening by sunrise is really well done. However, we do get to the more contentious part of the visuals, that being the still image skit-like cutscenes that take a bulk of the game's campaigns, as the story will have these still images of characters mixed in with boxes of characters talking with their heads, something similar to the skits of past Tales game. And it's clear on how much these skits are here were also implemented in a similar style to Tales of Arise, as well as other visual formats from other games. And many don't really like this style. Some assume it's due to either budget reasons. While looking at behind the scenes, I could definitely see it's more of a stylistic choice than anything. Now, a style of this can actually work if it's appropriate and suits the game in a way, just as we look at games like say Bayonetta for example. As while it does have traditional awesome cutscenes, they also use these film static cutscenes here as more of a stylistic choice. And the same goes with Gravity Rush here, which uses more of a comic-like panel for its cutscenes. However, for Scarlet Nexus' case, it's definitely an acquired taste. And oddly enough, there are a few action cutscenes that still use this format, and I'll admit it does look a little bit jarring, though thankfully I'll offer it spared when the game does have the more emotional and action-packed cutscenes. I'm sort of in the middle of how I feel about it, save for one part, but we'll talk about that later. The combat. Now in this game, we probably get to one of the really best parts about it, and that would have to be its combat. Now Scarlet Nexus is a full-on action RPG with gameplay that feels close and on par with other high-octane action games, as well as RPGs with the likes of say Devil May Cry, Bayonetta, Final Fantasy XVI, and Kingdom Hearts 2, with allowing you to control as Yuto Sumeragi and Kasane Randall depending on the route you choose. And both of them have their own unique playstyles and feel very different, with Yuto being more fast-paced and suited for more close-quarters combat, and Kasane Randall opts for a more slower but more AoE multi-hit combo style approach. However, what sets the gameplay apart from what I just mentioned before is using psychokinesis, where you have the ability to throw nearby objects rapidly towards enemies, which adds a new flavor to the general light and heavy attacks you perform, and you have the freedom to use this ability in the beginning, mid, or even end of a combo, or even serve as an alternate method of attack. You even have these special objects, and while throwing them takes much more longer to pull, you get to inflict much more damage, but also provide a QTE with different inputs and unique animations and effects, like for example, hitting enemies with either water or oil barrel, as well as sucking the substance from them and placing towards the enemy, or using the metal girders here, spinning to hit multiple enemies at once, or one of my favorites, using a bulldozer to ram towards an enemy. It's really badass and satisfying to pull off, almost like you're a superhero in some kind. There's also the struggle arm system, or SAS for short, where you get to use different powers from your party members for a limited time till they recharge. And each power is unique in both their characteristics as well as effects. Like for example, using pyrokinesis will create a fire tornado as the finisher, while electrokinesis will provide electrical projectile shockwaves when you slash. Teleportation will provide you to zip towards the enemy quickly, with clairvoyance being able to see enemies that are either hidden or just invisible, as well as being able to perform a much more perfect dodge. And the more you bond with your own party members during the bond episodes, these abilities get upgraded, like clairvoyance's perfect dodge being able to shatter enemies' super armor, as well as invisibility being able to stay much more longer, especially when you perform a combo, and you're granted new mechanics like Guardian, Combo, and Assault Vision, which allows new methods to combo and follow up attacks. And near endgame, you have the option to switch between 4 sets of SAS on the fly, and through the brain map, this game's skill tree, you have the potential to unlock new moves, finishers, buffs and debuffs, and abilities, even having the ability to use 4 SAS abilities all at once. And honestly, it's really epic, and makes for some really potential combo plays. And while on encounters you may come across enemies that in some cases are designed to be taken by one special ability, it's more so to test your skills and knowledge of using it correctly. And in a lot of cases during encounters, you're free to use any of the abilities to your liking, even if your party members will yell at you constantly of saying which ability to use in case you forgot. Despite saying it constantly over the course of the entire game, I can definitely say that the more you progress, the skill ceiling you have, especially to master the combat perfectly, is very high, and provides almost limitless variety at your disposal. Speaking of, we also have the Brain Drive and Brain Field respectively, with Drive being able to be a power gauge that makes your attack, movement speed, and overall attacks much more faster, as reduced on how much psychokinesis you can spend. And you also have the Brain Field, which is essentially a brand new gameplay gimmick, where it places your entire kit, with the ability to throw nearby objects as your new set of combo strings, which is very powerful, but risky, as staying long in the Brain Field will eventually kill you if you don't shut it off, which is a nice attention to detail, where in lore they explain that using the Brain Field for so long will cause stress from the brain, and it's too dangerous to hold for a certain period amount of time. And as mentioned, the brain map also has abilities unlocked for both mechanics to flesh them out. The name of the game with Scarlet Nexus combat is to strategize and choose on how you defeat the enemy encounters with the tools you are given, especially when it comes to the others that have weak points as well as a crush gauge, which prompts you to use them efficiently to quickly finish them off and deplete that gauge. And also the various others and bosses do put your skills at the test, and help that a lot of them have movesets as well as abilities to counter and special objects to hit them. Now, I've seen some gripes with many people saying that the enemy design is rather lackluster, as you'll see a lot of the same enemy types. And though while true, there are a few unique other designs here and there, but even then, with the repeats, they all have different abilities and moves, so they're not essentially fighting the same enemy with the same moves all over again. Among other gripes that people have is the infamous off-screen projectiles and some enemies being a bit tanky. Though with things like the guidance visions, as well as dodging them, as well as taking out which enemies that shoot first, is an option. And those tanky enemies can still be staggered by harder objects, and whittled down if you hit their weak spots or imbue them with status effects. And the last gripe I hear people say is that the party members just exist, and you can't really play as them, as you can only just play Yuito and Kitsane. The thing is though, however, with SAS and Psychonesis at your disposal, controlling the other party members with potentially less tools than them, or maybe even having the same tools, which in my opinion will cause some balancing issues among the combat, which is clearly designed for these two party members only. It's reasons why you can only play Sora in Kingdom Hearts or Clive from Final Fantasy XVI, and really, this isn't meant to be like a Tales game. Now, back when I first played this game when it came out day 1 in 2021, I used to think that Yuito played okay, it was more slippery, and I preferred Kasane overall. But however, upon my replay, I've grown much more attached to Yuito now a lot, and enjoyed him on par with Kasane's combat. Though that's mainly due to playing a lot of action RPGs and action games in general, though it's also due to me just mastering the tools. But what really helps with this gameplay is both the impressive sound design and the haptic feedback when playing on the PS5 with the DualSense controller, which overall makes the combat really smooth and provide very good positive feedback. The soundtrack. The music in Scarlet Nexus is absolutely phenomenal, with composers Hayata Takeda as well as Masato Nakamura, known for also collabing with the score for World of Final Fantasy, taking the reign among also other various artists. Given that this game is set in a more brainpunk and futuristic style, the sound team provided lots of different instruments and genres of music and mixed them together to provide a very unique experience. What I love the most here is on how dynamic the soundtrack can be. When exploring through the levels, you'll hear first a more calmer, slower rendition of the song, but when the other shows up, the music becomes more up-tempo, with providing more instruments, even adding things like techno and dubstep, that overall provides intensity. And also, a nice attention to detail is that when you are in Brain Drive, the music becomes high-pitched and even faster. The game itself has a good balance of genres, from going from orchestral to melancholic, to hardcore dubstep and even J-pop, with some really fantastic tracks. Here are a few examples of some of my favorite tracks. Game design and content. Now we get to the overall structure of the game. And overall, outside of the combat and story, the overall design for Scarlet Nexus is a bit of a mixed bag. Now, the level design for the game is almost sublinear, and while not entirely open as some other JRPGs, it's not entirely very linear that becomes like, say, a hallway simulator, as you do find some alternative pathways that will lead you to an item or an enemy hiding, and some of these levels will have environmental objects to tamper with some fun. Like for the abandoned subway, for example, having a train that can ram others straight in. Or even, for example, in Musuhagawa, you get to throw a giant crane hook at nearby enemies. Or, probably my favorite thing, riding a grate like a hoverboard in both Hieno Mountain and Babe itself. However, when we come to the dungeons, they're serviceable at best. Some of them look very good, like say the old museum or even Babe itself, with its very weird architecture layout, and some of them do provide some atmosphere. My favorite would have to be the old OSF hospital. During the main story, there's absolutely no music whatsoever, and you come across these very creepy old news recordings that play a very loud, distorted jingle the moment you get near them, which overall provides a bit of dread and horror. But as for the puzzles and the design, it exists, as there's some gimmicks that just require some SAS abilities, but not a whole lot to reach their full potential. The only ones prominent here is using teleportation through closed areas, electrokinesis to power through switches, hypervelocity to speed through conveyors, or psychokinesis using for doors. And while all of it is pretty cool, I think there could have been some much more room for other puzzles, especially for the ones that they've left out for SAS. Now, the dungeons themselves aren't bad by any means. Well, maybe except the final dungeon, as that does drag a bit. But they could have been better. But what could have been a lot better is the quests, as you'll be given side quests, and sadly, these are generic as they come. And while some do offer interesting challenges, the rewards you get are just very lackluster. It was only up to the recent update where they provide some challenges in the menu that provide some better results. So pretty much, you can just play the whole game without doing any single side quests whatsoever, and you won't be missing anything of value. And the thing is that the Bond episodes, where after you complete a story phase and take a breather and hang out with your own party, provides much more interesting quests to get invested, especially if some of them involve playable ones, because not only do you get to learn about the characters, but you also get to help in a trivial pursuit. And speaking of bonding, that's where we get into, as Scarlet Nexus does have bonding events. However, unlike a lot of JRPGs, where you do get to bond with everyone, including the female OSF members, it's most so to hang out with them and learn more about them, as well as upgrade your SAS abilities and get new mechanics. There isn't like say a buddy and romance marriage system, as wouldn't feel appropriate, given that Hanabi herself has more feelings for Yuto, and Kyoka acts like a mother figure. Even if age isn't into question given the lore-wise, as they will take anti-aging pills to prevent themselves from side effects with their powers. But honestly, what the approach Scarlet Nexus does have is actually refreshing. DLC. After the game came out a few months ago, Scarlet Nexus would offer free DLC packs, mixed with some free updates throughout the near end of 2021 and early 2022, with them providing additional free quality of life improvements, features, a photo mode, as well as a new challenge system, and a full-on battle simulator that includes refighting the bosses. As for the first two DLC, they will offer new costumes, items, and bond episodes for the party members that would have much more character interactions and dynamics. Even the Fraser twins themselves, as well as providing a little bit more depth with Yuto and Kasane. However, the last DLC, that being the Brain Eater pack, offered not only new costumes and missions, but also a new super boss and story content called Episode Karen, where you get to learn more about his backstory and why he was dead set of changing time to save Alice. It overall provides much more needed context for his motivation, And while it's disappointing as there are no moments where you get to play as him, but the extra fight against the super boss called the Shadow of the Recording kind of fixes that in my opinion. These DLCs are a nice addition and actually reasonably priced, among the season pass if you want to get the base game and DLCs bundled well. Hell, even the original demo it once had got overwritten with a brand new story demo that lets you play up to chapter 2 and you can save transfer to the full game. Like a lot of Bandai Namco products, Scarlet Nexus also had an anime adaptation which was launching right next to the game itself, and a feature in the game would have you insert codes after you finish an episode to get a reward. Sadly, however, since the anime finished debuting after 23rd of December 2021, this feature was no longer an option. This anime was made in tandem by Sunrise before they undergo the name change being Bandai Namco Filmworks, and it lasted for 26 episodes, serving as an adaptation of the game itself. And how did this anime turn out? Well, the anime sucks. The animation of characters look decent at best, and completely off-model at worst. The fight scenes are terribly done, with lots of heavy uses of red and blue backgrounds, and the choreography just doesn't match what the game's combat is going for. Characters go into brain dead immediately, like some of you see our Power Rangers, with some really bad CGI, and since the others are also rendered in CGI, it overall makes for some really ugly looking fights. The main cars outside on main 2 leads, and even aspects of Cowgirl and Kyoka, get absolutely no development whatsoever, or any time to shine, thanks to the mention of one episodes. The rewriting of Cowgirl and what he did to Yuto's dad goes completely against his character, and conflict between the two. But the first tip of the anime, the story focuses on Yuto's side, before going back to Kasane, making you also forget that she's also a main lead in this. Seto, Wataru, and Shige's voice actors don't return from the game, but they do at least a decent job. The music is absolutely generic, and the locations that try to match what the game's like what they're going for, just also completely flat. Orange descent into Warney is immediately swallowed in the very first episode. How they handled Nagi losing his mind is absolutely comical, and gives me drama from another certain anime that handled brainwashing very badly here. The Lava Twins aren't in the anime whatsoever. The explanation of why Cycle 2 was suspicious of the Rookie when it was done by random poses with no explanation whatsoever is just absolutely stupid. And the worst thing is that the characters don't bother to use SES during combat. The only time that SES happens in the show is during the design-driven fight, despite the fact that they can still do that in the show and help win fights. So you could tell on how well this anime turned out, and how well it did a great job of adapting its source material, albeit it done a poor job at that. At least the saving graces on this would have to be the backstory between Naomi and Kasane, Yuito and Nagi, as well as the bigger backstory episodes of Karen, Fubuki, Luca, and Alice, alongside a moment where both Yuito and Kaito confront each other. And the actual last episode gives a very interesting epilogue of how the game would potentially end. But outside of all of that, this anime is complete trash. Now, ever since Scarlet Nexus has concluded, for those who played it, had mixed opinions about the ending, with some feeling very satisfied, while some felt conflicted, as it overall felt ambiguous, with some loose ends not being wrapped entirely, and overall felt like sequel bait, such as things like on how the Kunai Gate as well as the extinction belt that created the others is now gone, but things on like the remaining created others are still on the loose, and what is going to happen to the people on the moon. And certain characters like say Yuito for example decides to step down and become more of a politician, while Kasane as well as other friends aim to head to the moon to try to fix things there. Though for my instance, I do think the ending was still good enough to end on its own terms, and in a way, it lets the audience imagine of what those characters are going to do next. And while playing for the first route, as Yuito may feel weird, if you play Kasane's, you'll get a much bigger picture, upon also playing the episode current DLC, which provides not only more context, but also has an epilogue with Alice and Luca interacting, with the latter feeling bad about his brother being banished from existence. Heck, even the final episode of the anime gives you an idea of where the story could go, with Kasane and her friends actually going to the moon, and Yuto actually looking and serving as a politician. What happened? And does Scarlet Nexus have a future? Now we get on to the biggest question surrounding this whole retrospective, and what exactly happened to Scarlet Nexus? Despite getting solid reviews and decent sales, why did it vanish from people's minds so much? Well, upon reflection, I found some possible theories of why that case is. One would have to be the marketing. Now, Scarlet Nexus had a lot of promotion all over 2020 and 2021 up to its very release. However, there was one catch, and you may notice the very first thing when you watch one of its trailers. That being Xbox, as Xbox had exclusive marketing rights to the game, especially when it comes to seeing at the end of each trailer it only being available on Xbox platforms. And this really was confusing among both JRPG fans and gamers, as the platform Xbox, and I say this wholeheartedly as I love JRPGs and I do love Xbox as I got 3 Xboxes, it's not exactly the most popular with Japanese games, even if they really did try with the Xbox 360, and that was when Xbox really peaked. Not to mention they also had a demo that was timed exclusive on both Xbox platforms for about a week, which had PlayStation players had to wait, and PC got nothing as a result, until of course the story demo, which came a year after its actual release. Now sure, some JRPGs of recent did have Xbox marketing, and even some Game Pass deals, most notably being the Persona games, as well as Metal Gear Fantasio, Yakuza Like a Dragon, and even Western RPG, Clear Obscure Expedition 33. But what made those games still sell and still within the public conscious is twofold. When it comes to Persona, Persona was still getting popular, especially thanks to the success of both Persona 5 and Persona 5 Royal, and it still continued to grow as a brand, thanks to more of the re-releases we got from Persona 3 Portable, Persona 4 Golden, as well as the even remakes of Persona 3 Reload and upcoming Persona 4 Revival. Regardless of the whole Xbox marketing exclusive thing, people still knew about Persona. And as for Metro's case, because of it being a brand new IP and being done by the same devs that gave us a lot of those games, people were really excited for it because they enjoyed Persona and they were curious about this game. And as for the case with Claire, a lot of Western RPGs already sell like big numbers, with cases like Baldur's Gate 3 as well as Cyberpunk and The Witcher 3. And reason why Claire also did so well, because it had things like strong word of mouth, as well as very high acclaim, and even got what made people hyped about was the fact that we had a fully modern turn-based RPG with some really impressive graphics and cinematic quality on par with AAA games in the industry. Something that in the current market is a rarity, as that was a field that Final Fantasy used to excel at back in the 90s and early 2000s. And heck, even the contemporaries that branched off, like from Scarlet Nexus, that being God Eater, Code Vein, those were still niche, and even the Tales series, as it slowly started to get a little bit popular again thanks to Arise, even if the momentum after it has dwindled a bit, though it's still coming to crawl back. Not to mention nowadays, there's been a new risk when it comes to making brand new IPs, especially ones with passion over remakes, or even long-running franchises, some of which would even be filled with just obnoxious corporate greed. And sometimes, those IPs will either stick or get faded into the dust. There was also another thing that I don't think has much weight as it did, but was the fact that one time Bandai Namco was very copyright heavy, when everyone would even just make a video on Scarlet Nexus, and just put a copyright claim to it. Not so much that it would remove the video, but so much that it would sort of ruin the marketing a little bit. Heck, I was a victim of this as well, and the same story was to Tales of Rise. However, upon release, they no longer became copyright heavy, which was really amazing, though that did initially hurt content creators' hype in the long run, and overall provide their own free marketing. There's also another factor that never came to the Switch, as the Switch was still one of the best selling consoles of all time, and currently it's the biggest console in Japan right now. And given that Namco tend to underestimate it, as a result of having late ports, that possibly just didn't, do much as it would have. Also, given the fact the actual post-launch content we had was abysmal, as some of the new exciting content we have now should have been a day one thing, I also do think that maybe some people were tacked off by Scarlet Nexus due to things like on how the story was very complicated and how the cutscenes really looked, but that is really speculation. Now, what does the future hold for Scarlet Nexus? Well, it's tough to say, as Anabuki himself did share potential ideas for a sequel, but even still, it's ideas regardless. And since in 2022, he returned back to the Tales series to uphold leadership and overseeing it, alongside producer Tomizawa. He even contributed in Arise's DLC in some capacity, as well as potential future projects. However, I wouldn't call it entirely grim, as we saw cases like Code Vein 2 spawn out of nowhere after a long hiatus. And despite some contention about, how it places in the story and timeline, it was still a massive surprise. So maybe there is still room for a Scarlet Nexus sequel in the future, if they do one. And at best, if they want to, given on how late Bandai Namco drops their ports to the Switch, they could still port this game as a complete version for the Nintendo Switch 2, with all the DLC, to potentially boost more sales and new interest. But then again, it's really tough to say. Though regardless, even if the future is grim, even if we do get no sequel, I still will never forget my time with Scarlet Nexus, as it's still one of the best JRPGs I've ever played, and I will forever treasure it as long as possible. Thanks everyone for joining my retrospective. It was very long and ambitious and took a lot of time and months in the planning, and it was nice to go back to one of my old favorites on the channel. For those who are fans of the game, I hope you enjoyed it, and anyone new here that probably ducked out because of spoilers, I do apologize, and hopefully this in a way has given you a chance to play the game. It's out now for dirt cheap at the time of this video on any platform, and as said, there's also a free story demo that can save transfer to the full game. But with all I said, special thanks to my patrons, and until then, Mad Kaiser out.